Atlantic City's uniqueness was it was the world's famous playground. Nobody had the ocean, beach, boardwalk, hotels, entertainment. Nobody else had what Atlantic City had.
Atlantic City was and is an experiment in social planning in that it depends entirely upon money spent by out-of-towners.
Atlantic City was always growing from its infancy, from its incorporated date of 1854. It was incorporated for health and recreation, and it stood the test of time all the way through for that purpose.
The Atlantic City that existed from, let's say, 1900 to right on into the 50s and the 60s, I don't know if there's any place in America like it. And the person responsible for that was Nucky Johnson.
Nucky Johnson, what a man.
And the guy was pretty shrewd, daring, bold.
He seemed to have no limits to his own appetite.
He had a flower in his lapel there, and he had a suit on, a tie, and he was dressed handsome, so to speak, like he was just out of Vogue or someplace, you know, Esquire.
Always a white shirt with a nice red tie, and you knew he was coming because he spoke very loud. You could hear him a block away.
It was a big, heavy laugh he had. A laugh that just made you feel good. And he was 6'4", big guy, must weigh around 250 pounds, and a handsome man.
All the money that went through the city went into his pocket first before it went to everybody else. You know, kind of a Robin Hood figure where he robbed the rich and helped the poor.
He loved to walk down that boardwalk dressed as elegantly as he could be with his carnation in his lapel. He'd give out $100 bills without thinking about it, not just to anybody, but not afraid to give it to somebody. He would just, but he was comfortable. It was his city in his eyes.
Nucky was smart in that he did have a facility for organizing people and getting people to march behind him and march to the tune that he was playing. And he was tough in that you didn't mess with him. He told you how things were going to be organized, whether it was, you know, brothels and saloons and hotels and businesses kicking back a portion of their take to be free of interference. And if you didn't kick back your portion, you were shut down. If you didn't march with his organization and you were, quote, a little person, and you decided that somehow you were going to go on your own, or you were going to rebel, or you were going to be critical, he would have you shunned. He would neuter you to the point where, you know, not only was nobody listening to you, but you couldn't make a living anymore.
My father's brother, Steve Devlin, was an officer, a police officer. And for some reason or other, Nucky or Louis, his driver, made a U-turn on Atlantic Avenue. My uncle Steve pulled him over and gave Nucky a ticket. My uncle wrote the ticket, handed it to Nucky. Nucky says, you know, I'm Nucky. And my uncle, yes, but you made a U-turn, you broke the law. He said a few words that he shouldn't have said. The law, you want to talk about the law? The law is Nucky. Nucky couldn't have people going around doing things against him. And he would do away with them. In the sense, you know, not killing him, I mean, change jobs and that sort of thing, make things unpleasant for them. He was the boss.
But he also looked out for the welfare of the community in what he did. That's why I call him the benevolent dictator.
He was a great friend to the black community in Atlantic City, the north side.
He got them jobs. He saw that they had work, and if they didn't have enough money in the wintertime when work wasn't available, he saw they had food on the table. He saw that they had, it was almost like a welfare.
If you talk to older, much older African Americans who have been in Atlantic City all their lives, they will tell you that Nucky Johnson, and this was a quote from a couple old black people. He was treated sort of like a white god because he was just so loved in the black community, and he was there for them through a lot of lousy, ugly winters, and there for them whenever they were down on their luck.
I've heard anecdotes about him, hearing about a family whose heat was turned off. And in the middle of the night on a winter night, he'd drive over and talk to the boss of talk to the head of the electric company or the gas company or whatever company it was, and turn that heat back on. They've got kids, they've got mouths to feed.
He came to a meeting one day, and it was all filled with members of the Black Elks, as well as many others who were invited. Nucky's coming, everybody rushed over. So they introduce him, they call him up on the stage, and he says, wait a minute. He walks off the stage, goes down on the floor, and said, you see, I don't want you looking up to me. I'm no better than you. I'm just like you folks, so I came down to talk to you on your level.
There was a quid pro quo, which is he expected their loyalty. But he got their loyalty, and they in turn had his loyalty. Yeah, he genuinely cared about the working poor of Atlantic City, and even though he lived like a potentate, he never forgot them. When they approached him in need, he responded.
Atlantic City in the 1920s, it was an amazing place. Miss America pageant was started in 1921. You had all of these grand old hotels that were being built or being added onto. Imagine the boardwalk just filled with all of these hotels and thousands of people walking the boardwalk, all the time. Beaches are packed. It was a really amazing place. And you add to that, of course, the prohibition and the booze and all of that.
Prohibition comes in. What a greater opportunity to have illegal booze when you have prohibition.
The tastes of the patrons dictated what would be offered. And the tastes of the patrons primarily was broads and gambling.
Running wild, lost control. Running wild, mighty bold. Stealing James, reckless too. Every mind, all the time, never blue.
In order to provide booze, broads, and gambling, there had to be accommodations. The law had to be bent. The law had to be ignored. And to do that with a certain degree of safety and confidence, businesses had to know that there wasn't going to be any unpredictable enforcement. And to assure them of that, they knew they'd have to kick something back.
Atlantic City was very unique, in terms of how things weren't enforced here in the city, and it was just kind of an accepted fact.
Everyone played the numbers, and the numbers come out 3 times a day. Nucky had people paid off Nucky, but they paid well, 500 to 1, so $5 for every penny, and everybody made a living off of it. But Nucky had to control the police, and one day I got up to where I made $12, and I said something to my father. And he found out I was handling the numbers. I never get so mad, so excited in his life. You come with me, took me down to where I was turning the numbers in, and made the man promise he'd never let me play the numbers again. He made me promise I'd never go into the number racket. And yes, I did play the numbers, and it was good. I was doing fine.
When they were going to be raided, whether it was the state bringing in a raid or whatever, local police were notified, and of course they, in turn, would notify the owners of the establishment that they're going to be raided. They would put everything, in this particular case, they would just go down below it was a boathouse, huge place, and they would just go down, put all the stuff in the boat, take it out to sea while the raid was taking place. They find nothing, they go. When it was secure enough, they would bring it back. Atlantic City was a prime location, being it had an inlet and a waterway, access to the waterway.
Nostra, the smuggling racket, isn't easy. It's ocean enemy number 1, and a determined Coast Guard has put it on the spot.
Rum runners, they called them. It wasn't just rum, it was illegal booze of all kinds would come in by boat at night. And the Coast Guard didn't have boats as fast as rum runners did. In fact, there's a story that one time they got one of the boats, I'm not sure how it happened, and they turned around and used that boat to try to continue to nab the other boats, because they could now speed up with them a little bit.
If the rummy refuses to stop, a Coast Guard one-pounder is brought into action, but only as a last resort. Business is business, and with the Coast Guard, the business at hand is the prevention of smuggling.
There was money to be made by barrelfuls for illegal booze, for prostitution, people on vacation. You know, people would do that. If they didn't want it, they wouldn't have had it. That's the easy way of looking at it.
That partnership between racketeers, hoteliers, and politicians was really forged by the Commodore around the turn of the century, a little bit before.
The predecessor to Nucky was Commodore Coonley, and Nucky's father was already entrenched in that operation politically, as sheriff and being involved as he was in this political power play that was existing. So he grew up seeing it happen, learning about it, and in small ways participating in it.
His father was a role model. I mean, look, his father rotated in office to be sheriff. You know, one term he was sheriff, the next term he was undersheriff, but he was always in control. And Nucky saw that process play out, and he says, hey, you know, if you're tough and you're smart and you got the right horses and you got the right people following you, you can game the system. And Nucky did game the system for a very long time. I think he got a certain amount of class and flamboyance from his mother, and he got a certain amount of hard-fisted, tough-nosed politics from his father. And I also think what he got from his father was a cynical understanding for how to manipulate the process, and that the process was there to be manipulated by the strong and the smart.
He was involved in the county political scene, as developed eventually as the county treasurer. Earlier than that, he was, I believe, the secretary to the county. But they did this because he was the one that had to sign all the checks, and that gave you a position to be in to have more control over the operations needed to secure your power. And so Nucky was exposed to all this, and then he built upon it, and his strength came out. And when Coonley went to jail for graft, they could never get these people, these power people, for all the things they did. They just could not do it. Nucky took advantage of the opportunity, whether he had the network set enough that he could step in and do it, or whether he just had the nerve to be the one to take it over, or there wasn't anybody else that could contend with him, that he took in, and then he built it to a greater proportion.
He was married young.
They were childhood sweethearts. They did emerge as adults in an era where it was common for childhood sweethearts to bond and stay that way forever. All reports were that he was pretty devoted to her.
You know, from what I read, you know, that was the love of his life. And she died young of TB.
Would he have continued in his pursuit of political power? No question about it. If Mabel had lived, he still would have been a corrupt politician. Would he have been the same, you know, reckless party person? No, I don't think he would have, because all reports were that he was pretty devoted to her, and he apparently was heartbroken when she died.
I'm sure it made him who he was, and it influenced his view on life, having lost his wife so early. Um, it made him maybe a little more reckless, or maybe a little less willing to commit to another marriage.
If Nucky had been a party person, he would have been a party person with his wife on his arm, and she would have performed the role that his mother performed, which was, be the political socialite. And I think when she died, then he saw no need to restrain himself and enjoyed himself. Baseball was his favorite sport. Women was his favorite pastime.
Nucky liked women, and he always had a gang around him. God, he had a slew of girls. They were all belonged to Nucky, and some beautiful girls. And he took them, and he had them. Everybody knew it. Oh, I'm going up there in the bedroom with Nucky and that sort of thing. And they weren't playing checkers, that's for sure.
I heard lots of those kind of stories about Nuck Johnson throwing a party, to honor somebody. Nuck Johnson, throwing a party and bringing a bunch of people with prostitutes. Nuck Johnson, taking people places. He did a lot of that, and that's pretty savvy.
Every couple of weeks or so, he would send a bus up to New York City on a Saturday night. Wait for the show to be over. One of the shows like Hell's a Poppin', where they had chorus girls, and all the chorus girls would be invited to come to Atlantic City for 2 nights. They'd come in on Saturday night, Sunday night, come back on Monday, because they had no show on Sunday. And he'd send the bus up, the girls would come down. He took over a whole floor of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, the Ritz Hotel, and they had their party all night long. They would be partying, and the next day, if it was summer, they'd go on the beach, and if not, they'd go back and keep on partying until it came time for them to leave.
Yeah, the Ritz was brand new back then. He had a penthouse suite. From what we hear, every morning he would have a fresh red carnation to put in his lapel, and he would look out over the empire that he had created.
Nucky Johnson was wealthy enough and famous enough that he took residency on the entire 9th floor of the Ritz-Carlton.
This was extremely swanky back in the day, very sophisticated, very classy.
The Ritz, given its age, had very many unique and different features from what you find in a building today. The bathrooms in the individual apartments, they actually had hot and cold, salt and fresh water. It was thought back then that saltwater baths and showers were very therapeutic, and the building was totally piped like that. So it was a dual system. The original boilers were coal-fired.
I'm going home, where I was born. When she was born, I'm going back to join the throng.
We still have the marble floors and the accents of that. We have the gorgeous grand staircase. We have the ballroom. We have a very decorative fireplace. We have the original lobby and the configurant of it, and the second floor lobby. Just a lot of the beautiful ceilings. We just have been able to maintain them and keep them alive and well.
So long, goodbye, I'm going home.
It started over a girl. Started over a girl that Hearst wanted, and Nucky said no, and wouldn't let him. And Hearst said, "Okay, I'm going to get you." It all started over a girl.
The local lore and firmly believed rumor is that he and Nucky vied for the attentions of a particular showgirl at the Silver Slipper, and that Obviously Johnson was in town far more than Hearst was in town. And apparently one weekend when Hearst was in town expecting this woman to be at his beck and call, she wasn't, because she was with Nucky, and that led to a battle between the two of them that neither one would back down from, because Hearst had the ability to write newspaper stories, get them written, and he was doing everything he could to shine light on Johnson as a corrupt figure.
They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. In this case, I think it's worth a couple thousand. Walking with Al Capone.
It's certainly part of his legacy. The organization of, criminal groups in America certainly was going to occur, and it would have occurred without him. But he was the host of the first serious convention.
What they consider the first organized crime syndicate was alleged to be that one in May of 1929, because he knew them and invited them to come down here and make Atlantic City a neutral territory so that his area is protected. They in turn wanted to stop warring and killing each other and yet control their own, so they came down and had that.
People like Luciano from a major city of New York, and people like Capone from a major city of Chicago, and you had Longy Zwillman from Newark.
Who knows how involved he was, and who knows what really went on, but it is a lot of fun to speculate. And to say that Atlantic City was neutral territory, and that's why they met here, and they came to accords that lasted, and that we were at the center of it all, here in Atlantic City.
He was only too glad to be the host, knowing that there was only an upside. I mean, nobody was going to get arrested in his town, and nobody was going to be embarrassed, and he wasn't the type that was going to permit anybody to come to town and fight, and so there was no downside.
Pictures came out after the fact, well after the fact. I read that Nucky said his picture was superimposed in there or something like that. But that could be just a protective measure, a defensive measure in case somebody's going to use it and say, here's evidence against you.
Nucky always said that, he was in that picture, he was wearing a summer suit, and he would never be caught dead, walking in the winter on the boardwalk in a summer suit, and later on he said something about a photographer catching him.
The standard that I try to use as a historian is clear and convincing, and so I wasn't happy just getting something that sounded good. I needed to know that several really good sources would feel, yeah, that's accurate, that's what happened. And everybody that I talked to about that picture, everybody that I talked to that I thought, was like on the inside, said, that picture's bogus, that didn't happen.
And of course the photograph wasn't published till months after also, which makes it a little suspicious. My thought maybe he was walking down the boardwalk, and maybe the photographer tried to catch them in the photograph and didn't quite get the right photograph, and then went and doctored it a little bit. Maybe it really did happen, but it wasn't quite that photograph. I think Nucky's right. He wouldn't have been wearing a summer suit walking on the boardwalk in the winter.
I don't think it's legit. Now, if somebody can prove it to me, I'll listen to him, but I think there's too many people that have died to be able to prove that.
Hearst said, we're going to get you. And he kept after him and after him and after him.
I think Nucky was probably the type that would have just, continued flaunting, his relationship with the woman, as well as his, apparent immunity, because he was arrogant.
The decisive vote of the 36th state against prohibition is happy news for the grain raisers of the United States and for many others throughout the land.
It was the beginning of the end. It was a steady decline after Prohibition. Prohibition gave Atlantic City a real edge on every resort on the East Coast, and Prohibition was the high point of the town's old history. And when Prohibition was repealed, Atlantic City lost, a very important edge that it had.
There'll be no more scenes such as this. Barrel after barrel of prize whiskeys destroyed by government agents. It's going to be a cold winter for the barrel busters.
Rumor has it that Hearst was able to get FDR's ear and to get the FBI sent to Atlantic City. That's what all the old timers thought happened. Nucky had the local police department and the county prosecutors, detectives, keeping tabs on the FBI agent.
It was a real nothing. There was no problem. He got a $50,000 check. Damn it, doesn't he forget to report it as income. They thought he was going to beat that one lousy check. I mean, if they forgot about it, he was a busy man. We all thought he was going to walk, but he didn't walk.
Kind of his fall from grace.
It did take, 5 years for the FBI to get him. And if you read the report of the FBI by William Frank, he was terribly disillusioned about the whole process, because when he came to town, he figured, hey, there'll be no difficulty sending this guy off to jail in a heartbeat. They didn't get a conviction until 1941. And why? Because he had built up such loyal bonds with the people that he did business with, that people would rather go to jail than give up Nucky Johnson. People would rather commit perjury and get convicted of it and go to jail than give up Nucky Johnson. That people would remain silent and be held in contempt of court and go to jail before they would give up Nucky Johnson.
They got him for the taxes, as they got many of the other gangsters. If they couldn't get him for some of the bigger crimes, they went after him for tax fraud. And so he ended up in 41 on trial and going to jail.
I'm sure that he wanted to keep involved with what was going on in Atlantic City. Flossie was his lifeline to Atlantic City from prison.
Cost me a lot, but there's one thing that I've got, it's my man.
She was a flamboyant human being. If you looked at her, she was attractive. If you heard her voice, you'd never forget it.
Very warm and friendly. She was not stuck up at any time.
She came from humble beginnings. Her father was a streetcar conductor.
Aunt Floss was a Ziegfeld Follies girl.
The tabloids have her coming to a party here in Atlantic City because Nucky was famous for inviting beautiful women to his lavish parties, and Aunt Floss was Miss Philadelphia when she was 16 years old. They were there at the party, and Uncle Nuck took a liking to her, and they became friends and dated, and as we all know, prior to him going away to, he likes to call it college. They wed the day before, I believe it was.
All my life is just despair, but I don't care when he takes me in his arms. The world is bright,
If you see pictures of my Aunt Floss, you look at her and you say, even at 60 years old, she turned heads. And I can see her turning Uncle Nuck's head because he was apparently somewhat of a womanizer in his day. Matter of fact, I wouldn't even say somewhat, obviously he was a womanizer. But I think Aunt Floss stopped him in his tracks, and that was the end of it.
I don't think there's any question that there was strong bond and strong affection. Would he have married her if he wasn't going to jail? I think unlikely. At least that's what all the old timers told me. That if he wasn't going off to jail, he probably would not have gotten married. He would have been happy. You know, they sort of lived together and then didn't live together. He had more than one residence, and she could be in one place, he could be in another, and so, you know, would he have married her if he hadn't gone to jail? I don't think so.
She was the settling factor in many cases in which Uncle Nuck was upset with someone for doing something that should or shouldn't have been done, and Aunt Floss would be the one that would smooth things over.
She was dedicated to him, and she was a person that not only did she like the limelight, she liked being Nucky Johnson's wife just as much.
I am his
I think jail impressed upon him that it was over, that he wasn't going to be a power anymore.
Lost his position now. The position was open. Now, who was going to get the position? All of a sudden, these names came into play. A fellow by the name of Senator Frank Farley, Tommy Taggart, better known as Two Gun Taggart, and Emerson Richards, known as the former acting governor of New Jersey. I met with Senator Farley, as Nucky would want me to do. He's going to go in, I should be with the one who's going to go in.
Farley's the new boss. That's the reality. He wasn't going to be like Coonley. And I have tremendous respect for Coonley, and I think he did too. But Coonley was content. Coonley needed politics so badly that when he got out of jail, he ran for city council. Now, speaking volumes about him and Atlantic City, he got elected 4 times. Okay? This is a convicted felon. Getting elected 4 times and having a street named after you. So that says a lot about Coonley, says a lot about Atlantic City. But I think Nucky saw that, and this is Dick Jackson's theory, this is not mine. He saw that and he said, I was top dog for a long time, and I'm not going to come back and, you know, run for some office or, you know, be part of the organization. Farley's the new boss. That's the reality. I'm going to accept it, you know, and there'll be maybe times when I need his help, and there may be times when he needs my help. But I don't need to be involved in the day-to-day organization. That part of my life's over. And he seemed to be content with that.
I think he saw from the fall of Commodore Coonley, he realized that once you're out, you're out. You know, it's hard to come back from the dead, per se. And when he came back from jail, he realized there wasn't a place for him, and so he kind of stepped aside and let the next one take over.
He never really accepted the fact that he did anything wrong, I don't think. I think that's one of the reasons when he petitioned for a pardon at the completion of his sentence, there was still an outstanding debt of $20,000, a fine that was attached to his being found guilty. And I'm pretty sure that had he felt it in his that he should pay it, that he would have paid it, that he would have come up with money to pay it. But I always felt that he never really accepted the fact that he had done something nefarious enough to be put away to jail, and that the $20,000 became a sticking point. And that's probably part of the reason why the government kept hounding him for money, because he never paid that $20,000 fine. I mean, he went to his grave never paying that fine. And I think it was just a matter of principle. He was a strong-willed, strong-principled man, and he felt that he had been done wrong. And he pled innocent to all the charges, and it didn't work out for him. And he accepted it, but he never was willing to accept the fact he had done something wrong.
His response was, 4 years in university is a small price to pay for the life that I lived. And so he wasn't the least bit, upset. And in Atlantic City, he wasn't tarnished either. They continued to adulate him because he was the man. He not only delivered, but he did it with with a whole lot of class and style and a good time.
Nucky had his wife was on the board over there at Redalt. They had their income and that sort of thing, and some other dealings that they had made when he was the boss, had income from, and the wife was handling the money. They had money. They weren't poor or anything.
He would go out a couple of nights to maybe the trenches or one of the bars or something, but overall you didn't see him out that much in the public eye. But he'd be up taking his walk on the boardwalk, and he would walk with Flossie, and they just lived a very quiet life.
He was still Nucky. He was still 6'4", and still had a big voice on him, and a hell of a laugh. He would laugh, and then you'd have to laugh with him.
He was a bigger-than-life character. He genuinely liked people. A person at the old Atlantic City Hospital told me that even after he was out of politics and a codger old man, he would stop by the hospital 2-3 times a week, walk up and down the wards, look at the names of who's in rooms, saw a name he'd recognize, even if he didn't know the person. Hey, do I know your uncle? Did I know your father? And go in and wish him well. And he would spend a part of an afternoon doing that. Pretty cool.
But I remember at Uncle Nuck's funeral how touched and moved she was with the people who came to pay their respects to Uncle Nuck, and especially the little people from the city that were not in power, not the influential people, but the people that Uncle Nuck had helped along the way. I often have said that if we allowed all the trinkets that people brought and wanted to put in the casket for Uncle Nuck to be put there, we could never have closed the casket, and we probably couldn't have carried it out. And I think it was a great loss to Atlantic City and to those people to see him pass away, and to my aunt especially. She really never recovered from that point in time.
I think Nucky was a great guy. I do not view him as a bad guy. And again, people have to be measured by context. And the community that he presided over was one that bought into what it was that he was about. And so, I can't tell you that I'm a moral relativist, but you cannot look at morality without looking at it within context. And did Nucky violate the law? Yeah, the whole community violated the law. The whole community was in on the game.
He was a crook, no question about it. But, as I use the term benevolent dictator, he didn't just take it all to himself. He shared it. So if you're looking for the Robin Hood, he was a Robin Hood of his era.
I can't find anybody in the first half of the 20th century who was as dominant a boss in his community and was a power outside of his community and was a power in two different worlds, organized crime and politics, and was able to, in his community, make those two spheres into one thing, and was able to do it as long as he did without going to jail. That was a big deal.
I'm not ashamed of anything that Uncle Nuck did. I think he had everybody's welfare at heart when he did those things.
Upside is that he had the vision, he had the drive and determination to make Boardwalk Hall a reality, and Boardwalk Hall continues to be a major asset of the community. And so that's one of his positive legacies. An equally enduring and negative legacy is the community's thus far inability to embrace the customary means for the operation and transfer of power. Many people involved in politics since Nucky and since Farley think they're going to be the next boss. And the world has changed, and they're not going to be the next boss.
There's nothing in Atlantic City honoring Nucky Johnson. Is it because he was convicted of income tax evasion? Maybe so, but there was a man that without him, Atlantic City may not be what it is today.
Most people don't know who he is, know anything at all about him. They'll read it and they'll say, oh wow, look what he did. They don't know the many other things that he did to help people. If somebody was in trouble, they needed an operation, or they were in trouble financially, he always reached into his pocket and came up with help.
His legacy, their legacy, lives in Atlantic City today. And hopefully it will continue for a long time to come.
My dad made me make a promise to him that every Christmas I would go out and make sure that Uncle Nuck and Aunt Floss had a wreath on the mausoleum out of respect for what they did for our family. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I do it every year because I want to. And I'm grateful for what I got in life that they helped.